The census page where we were, this was from the 1930 census. Okay. This was the page. No, our barge captains. Oh, there's somebody that might. Right. I know a lot of guys. So let me know if you want to start.
So we live?
Everything's live.
As soon as David is ready. Yeah, for a while. Sounds good. That's fine. Good afternoon and welcome. We have a lot of moving parts here, and I'm going to stop talking. Let's enjoy the ball machine for one more round. The George Rhodes audio kinetic sculpture, always a highlight of any visit to the Waterfront Museum here in Red Hook, Brooklyn. My name is Stephan D.W., and this is the Tideshift Project. This is the second of 3 sessions for this project, which is made possible through the Humanities New York. This was funded in part by Humanities New York with support from the National Endowment for Humanities. And I know our contact at Humanities New York, Joe Murphy, wanted to be with us today, but was unable to join us. He's watching on Zoom, and we hope that he and all of you watching live streaming at home will feel free to join in and ask questions in the chat, and we'll try to pick those up and share those questions with our guests today. This session of the Tideshift Project is focused on this project that is looking at oral histories from the working harbor. Is focused on folks who lived on barges like the one we're on now. This is the Lehigh Valley number 79, and this barge, like other barges like it, was used for moving freight, connecting the railroads with the piers. And our captain here will turn off the ball machine in just a moment. So we're connecting the railroads to the piers, and these barges for a long time had resident caretakers on them, barge captains who made sure the goods got to where they were going. And those barge captains lived on board with their families for quite a few decades. And we have some folks who are barge families with us today, and also coming in by Zoom, a gentleman who actually lived on a barge and worked on barges himself, and we're going to hear all their stories in just a few moments. A little technologically complicated because we're doing this live stream to Zoom, so bear with us for a few hiccups as we go along. Yeah, we're going to start in just a moment with the guy who rescued this barge and keeps this barge working, though not moving freight. The Lehigh Valley number 79, the Waterfront Museum, operates as an art museum, a history museum, and a performance space, including the kinetic audio sculpture behind us. So David will step up here and give us a welcome to the barge and tell us a little bit about it. And after David speaks, he'll introduce our archivist, who will talk about the research she has done on this barge and its families. And then we'll get into our oral history collecting project here. So please join me in welcoming our captain, David Sharps.
Thank you so much, Stefan. And welcome to Red Hook and welcome to the Lehigh Valley Barge number 79. Today's program has taken quite a while to put together. We started talking with many of folks 2-3 years ago prior to COVID, and it's just taken so long for this to come together. It's really great to see it finally happening. And thanks so much to all of our sponsors and the museum's board. The barge was, to the New York Harbor, a little workhorse. As you know, the railroads prior to containerization, our bridges and trucks and highways, there wasn't any bridges from the mainland over in New Jersey to all the ships that were in the New York Harbor. So the bridge, that connection that shuttled the goods, was a barge like this, a flat bottom boat. Sometimes there were things that were carried in the hull of the boat, like sand or gravel in a boat that barge that didn't have a deck. Sometimes it was a flat deck for goods that didn't have to be out of the weather. And then, of course, a barge like this was used for perishable cargo, rice and wheat and flour and sugar that needed to be out of the weather, could be shuttled from the railroad to a barge like this and then to a ship. Coming the other way, it could come from a ship and the ship could be unloading onto the dock side, but also it could be loading onto a barge and then going over to meet the many railroads, almost 13 of them to be exact, that could then go to the hinterland of the United States. So this was very active. At one time, there were 5,500 barges working in the river, about 1,300 barges like this. I got this barge at its very end after it had become obsolete. With containerizations, barges like this were no longer needed, and they started to becoming scrap beginning in 1956 through till the last ones were used in about 1986. So when I came along, coming from the cruise ships in Paris, having lived on a barge in Paris and having worked on the ships as a juggler for Carnival Cruise Lines back when I was 21 years old, I came to the New York Harbor, found a barge like this, lived on it. It was sunk in the mud. It was the mud puppy. But as that one became no longer available because of development and progress, that's when I bought this barge for $500. So I was a young buck then, at 29 years old, which is about 37 years ago. But from the very beginning, I wanted to have a place to live on the water and to have a showboat and a show place. So preservation is a very, very tough fight. You've got to have, well, as I tell my school kids, if it matters to you, well, then it matters. And this barge mattered to me. It might not have mattered to too many people, but it mattered to me. You can see here inside all these old signboards from all these various ships and barges and ferries that didn't make it. Well, they lost their purpose, they lost their place in life, and they lost mattering to somebody. So at that point, they sank and they're no longer. The wonderful thing about history is we get a chance through an artifact like this is to bring these things back alive. It's our goal and our mission today to bring back alive some of the folks that worked on them, to bring back alive some of the stories. And what that does is it brings alive history. So We have our own staff here, not very large, but Stefan and Minda and Mariana, we have a collection of artifacts that we're always trying to find more information about. We have just different stories that we're always seeking to find. And one of the most pleasure that I've had is to have a chance to work with Minda, who I'm going to bring up now. And she delved with a passion, as you will see in her presentation, into finding out some of your names that you are here today and other names through various ways. And I think you'll enjoy how we bring history back to life here on the old Lehigh Valley 79. So without any further ado, please welcome to the stage, Minda Matz.
Hello, thank you, David. Thank you everyone for being here today, both in person and virtually. My name is Minda Matz, and I've been a volunteer here on the barge since May 2019, so for 3 years. And I was curious about the barge down in Red Hook, and my background is in history and archives. And as I learned more about the barge and the unique history that it is a part of, David shared with me a page of the 1930 census of merchant seamen. I had never heard of this section before, so I immediately began researching. What I found was that despite the importance and presence of ships in the New York harbor, it was not until 1930 that for the first time, the census sought to document those living aboard those vessels, including those of the Lehigh Valley Railroad barges. Accounting for this special population continues even today with the recent 2020 census in a section called the Maritime and Military Vessel Enumeration. As I learned about the stories of Alice Scanlon, who lived on Barge 59 as a child, I noticed that at the top of the page, Barge 59 was not listed, and I realized that there had to be at least one other page. So I began looking. This search started with Google, of course, but I didn't find anything through that. My next step was to the New York Public Library. I found that there was a library version of Ancestry.com that had access to this special census. The census was organized by state and county, and since the barges were based in New Jersey, that's where I started. After looking through digital pages, I found a second page, but that didn't have Barge 59 on it either. Still convinced that there had to be more, I continued searching. I went through the counties in New Jersey and then started looking across the harbor in New York. After looking through hundreds of digital images, I finally found a page that had Barge 59 on it. It was mistakenly filed as being in the Bronx. The family listed as living on the barge were the Michelsons, which made sense based on what Alice had shared about moving off of the barge during the Depression. Once that puzzle was solved, it struck me that Barge 79 should be listed in one of these documents too, but it didn't seem like it was. Then I noticed that on the second page at the very bottom, there was a barge after 82 that wasn't listed at the top. The page was fuzzy at the bottom, so I couldn't be sure that it was 79, though I hoped it was. Hoping to find a clearer version, I went to the National Archives and Records Administration in the Battery downtown to look at the originals, where I was told that after microfilming the census in 1949, the Bureau had destroyed the originals, but to try the New York Public Library for a copy. So back I went to the library. In the microfilm room, they had never heard of this special census section, but they were able to call the original films out of storage. Scouring through those films at the microfiche machine, I found the page and was able to make a clearer image. And was able to confirm that Captain William Baird and his wife Christine worked and made their home on the Lehigh Valley Railroad Barge 79, this barge, in 1930. Using the basic information found in the census, I started looking for more information about all of these captains and their families that lived on the barges. With the approximate year born, plus or minus a year, and the place of birth or place lived, I started searching the materials available on Ancestry. Going through all of the captains and family members listed on these 3 pages, I was able to identify about a dozen people who seemed like they were related to the captains and were on Ancestry, and I reached out to them. We are lucky to have gotten some responses back, and a few of those family members are with us today in person. While we are lucky to have them to share stories, unfortunately, it does not appear that Captain Baird and Christine had any children, but I was able to find information about them that I would like to share with you today. This is Captain William Baird. William Baird was born in Seattle on October 1st, 1886, 5 years before King County even issued birth certificates. He was born to his parents, William and Catherine Gold Baird. To put this in perspective, William Baird was born just 9 years after the end of the era of Reconstruction and just 27 days before the Statue of Liberty, which we can see from the barge today, was dedicated by Grover Cleveland. The United States was in the midst of the period we call the Gilded Age, not just a show on HBO. During this period, railroads expanded greatly, notably with the Transcontinental Railroad being completed in 1869. At this time, not much is known about William Baird's early years, but in 1921, at the age of 35, he had made it to New York City after working on the ship, the H.K. Hall, where he served as second mate. The H.K. Hall was a 5-masted schooner launched in 1901 at the Hall Brothers Shipyard in Port Blakely, Washington. In order to work on ships traveling abroad, Baird needed to apply for a Seaman's Certificate of American Citizenship, a type of passport for merchant seamen. These certificates were introduced in 1796 and only issued through 1940 to protect American merchant seamen from impressment or kidnapping, and could be purchased for a fee of 25 cents. On December 22nd, 1921, William Baird paid his fee at the Office of the Collector of Customs of the Port of New York. Due to his lack of birth certificate, Baird needed 2 affidavits attesting to his American birth. He presented these, as well as a letter from the Standard Oil Company's Marine Department stating that he would be employed there as soon as there was a vacancy, though at this time we do not know if he actually was. At 5'7", he was about average height for the time, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, with a ruddy complexion, and with 3 deformed fingers on his right hand. The affidavits of his birth were from 2 men who were also in the maritime industry. The first, his cousin Luke Kerrigan, was a caulker at Teton and Lang Dock in Hoboken, New Jersey, and he lived in Manhattan. The second affidavit was sworn by his friend of 11 years, Joseph Kelly, a machinist at Robbins Dry Dock right here in Red Hook. On this form, Kelly claimed his address as 726 Van Brunt Street. Today, the street numbers only go up to 500 Van Brunt, but after asking the New York Public Library Map Division, they shared this insurance map of Brooklyn from 1916 that shows the address would have been in the New York Dock and Co. stores or warehouses, now known as the Beard and Robinson stores. These stores are still visible from the barge. As these seem to have been warehouses at the time, it is unlikely that he actually lived there. As for Baird, his address was given on the application was 25 South Street in Manhattan, which was the site of the Seamen's Church Institute, where Stephan actually works today. The SCI was founded in 1834 and provided religious as well as social services to seamen. While there were dorms at the SCI, sailors often used it as just a mailing address, as with its hundreds of mailboxes, it would hold mail for up to 6 months while they were at sea. So it is unknown at this time if Baird actually stayed in the dorms or simply used the mailing address. Regardless of where he laid his head in New York at the time, Baird was granted his certificate and was eligible to sail abroad. There are at least 2 times that I can confirm that Baird used this certificate to travel to Europe in the 1920s. Once in 1924, when he was an able-bodied seaman aboard the steamship Zarembo. No next of kin was listed. Another trip was taken to and from France in 1926. The back of Baird's certificate was stamped in December of that year. Less than 4 years later, William Baird was married and settled in New Jersey with a steady job. On April 2nd, 1930, the census enumerator was at the foot of Washington Street in Jersey City, New Jersey, where William Baird was the captain of Barge 79 and living on the cabin on the roof with his wife, Christine. The Bairds were just one of around 4 dozen Lehigh Valley Railroad barge households counted that year. Just 6 months prior to the count, the stock market had crashed, ushering in the period known as the Great Depression, which lasted until 1939. During this economic crisis, the benefits of living aboard a railroad barge were only increased. Just 2 years earlier, in 1928, Captain Jim Watts of Lehigh Valley Railroad Barge number 36, who also appears in the 1930 census, was interviewed by the Brooklyn Eagle for an article called "Carefree Life on Lighters in Harbor Attracts Many." And he talks about life on a barge at this time and the changing responsibilities of barge captain. Captain Watts revealed many aspects of the job and its benefits. So he said, "My job is to be responsible for the cargo. That's all. Once they used to require us to keep the boat in line during night towing, but that is all up to the towboat man now. The railroad furnishes us with coal and a fine place to live." Captain Watts also shared some more lighthearted observations, such as, "Here we play Parcheesi, the greatest game on earth. And it's as good as a trip around the world being down here. The wife likes it. We get to see things you would never dream of." A typical salary of a barge captain at the time was around $35 a week. And based on the budget detailed in the article, that left plenty for savings. Like Alice Scanlon's family, such savings allowed the Watts family to buy a house in New Jersey that they rented out for $45 a month. While we don't know how the Bairds fared at this time period, we do know that on September 22nd, 1930, Baird revisited the customs collector, returning his damaged certificate and applying for a replacement, and a new photograph was added to the file. This renewed certificate would become useful as he served on at least 2 other vessels in the 1930s. On June 1st, 1935, Baird was listed as an able-bodied seaman on the steamer Skodak, bound for France. It seems that the Bairds had left Barge 79 by this time, as Christine's address was listed as 11518 197th Street, St. Albans, Long Island. Although technically on Long Island, that address is and was considered to be the New York City borough of Queens. The house was built in 1930 and is seen in the 1940 tax photo from the Municipal Archives. A few months later, September 4th, Baird was again engaged as an able-bodied seaman, this time in the steamer Liberty, bound for France. Christine's address was the same. Whether Baird remained employed by the Lehigh Valley in 1935 is unclear, but we do know that in 1937, Baird was a barge captain for the Lehigh Valley Railroad, giving his address as barge number 9 on his application for benefits from the Railroad Retirement Board, which is a type of Social Security just for railroad workers. While not available online, using the information I found, I was able to request a copy of this document from the Social Security office. At the time of the census in 1930, Barge 9 was occupied by Jules Elias and his wife Eugenia, both of Belgium. But in June 1934, it was reported in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle that a barge captain, Ulysses Elias, drowned off of Pier H in Jersey City after roughhousing. Alice Scanlon also relayed a memory to David in an email of a Mr. Elias who fell off the boat and drowned. This is presumably the same person. This is a reminder of some of the unique dangers that came with barge life. By 1940, the Bairds had left the barge again and had gone landlocked, and were now in an apartment at 233 55th Street in Brooklyn. The 1940 census shows the Bairds' new neighbors in this Sunset Park building included other working class households made up of clerks, waitresses, musicians, carpenters, and welders. Their neighbors were mostly New York born, with only one Scotland born like Christine. Rent for their apartment in 1940 was $22 a month, or just $418 in today's dollars. In the 1940 census, both William and Christine reported that their highest level of education was elementary 8th grade. Unfortunately, beyond this, not much more is known about Christine Baird. Her estimated date of birth, based on the 1940 census, was 1878, which differs by about 10 years in that of the 1930 census. So because of this discrepancy in her birth in Scotland, finding out more information has so far proven difficult. In 1942, the Bairds were at the same address, and William Baird's old man's draft card for World War II shows that he was still employed by the Lehigh Valley Railroad Marine Department. At 55 years old, the purpose of the 4th registration draft was not necessarily for him to go to the front lines to fight, but for the US government to be aware of all the skill sets that could be useful to the war effort at home. And the 1950 census records were just released to the public in April, and William Baird at 64 was still going strong, working 40 hours a week as a railroad barge captain. He and Christine had moved to the lower apartment of 1814 Herring Street, Marine Park. As of now, this is where the Baird stories end. As more materials become publicly available, we hope to be able to learn more about them and more about all of the captains and families that shared the unique experience of working and living aboard the Lehigh Valley Railroad barges. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to those who will be sharing stories today.
Thank you, Minda. It was a tremendous amount of information there, and I'm sure there are lots of questions about that. But we also want to get into hearing stories from people. So let's get into our first story from our first barge family here. And we're gonna hear about Captain Claudio Cafiero. So Peter Cafiero, I think we have with us today. He'll just come up and join me up here in the rocking chair. Oh yeah. And I wanted to mention a couple things in the front of here. Minda mentioned cabin on the roof. It's a place that people live. We have here a model of this barge that we're on now with an earlier color. The Lehigh Valley Railroad went through several changes of its livery over the years. In this model, we see the green livery with a cabin on the roof. My understanding is the cabins were typically a bit larger than what you see here. But this gives you some idea of what we're going to be talking about in terms of living quarters for many of the barge families. But also, if you pull out a little bit, you'll see that we have the model sitting on a trunk, which may look familiar to you, Peter. Do you recognize this trunk?
That was one of the ones my grandfather, that my dad.
We'll
We'll talk to that.
Yeah, let's talk more about that. Before we get into talking about your father and grandfather, just for the record, would you tell us your name and what year you were born and your connection to New York Harbor?
My name is Peter Cafiero. I was born in 1962, which, if you do the math, means I have a big birthday coming up in another week or so. And I'm happy my daughters, Louise and Paula, are here. So we have two generations here to talk about prior two generations. My dad, Albert Cafiero, who was born in 1922, so he would have been 100 this past January, and his father, Claudio Cafiero, who was born in 1872. So the men in our family were always born in years ending in 2. And he was a barge captain, and my dad grew up on a barge very much like this, and was very excited when he heard about this project and came down and visited and brought me a number of times. And this is very similar to the barge that he lived on. So we finally persuaded my dad. My dad died in 2009. Actually, the swine flu epidemic, if you remember that, he unfortunately got the flu and then died a month later from complications of it. But we got him in 2008 to write down all these stories he'd been telling us. So I have some, I can read a little bit of it.
Yeah, I think we've got a slide showing his collection there. And I have to tell you, we use these stories talking to the public here all the time. It's really a wonderful resource, and I'm excited to hear you share them.
And yeah, as noted, so we were, our family is a competitor railroad, the Erie Railroad, so we're not Lehigh Valley. But they all, in those days, I think everybody was interconnected through the barges. So if I could just take a minute or two to read like the opening page, and I won't go into all the history that you were about my family, but my grandfather, the Cafieros, came from a town outside of Sorrento in Italy. They were probably originally fishermen and then sailors. And so my grandfather ended up in South Africa for 10 years, but he had a brother in Brooklyn, somehow decided to come up here, had engaged as a seaman on a ship coming up to Brooklyn, and then settled down, imported his wife from the old country and Louisa, and they were married here in 1920 and lived on a barge, on the Erie Railroad barge. So my dad writes, at the time I was born, my father was captain of a lighter belonging to the Erie Railroad. My first 5 years were mainly spent living on 2 barges. The first of these, Erie number 220, was an enclosed vessel with living quarters on its front end, so very much like this one has on the end here. The one-room cabin must have been about 20 feet long and not more than 8 feet wide. It had a wide built-in bunk, a living dining area, a coal stove for cooking and heating, and space for 3 50-gallon oak barrels to hold water for all our needs. Although our living quarters were tiny, our play space was immense. You're sitting in it right now. At times, it consisted of the entire freight house, somewhere near 30 by 80 feet. There were 4 large, huge sliding freight doors covering openings of about 10 feet wide. My father made some sturdy removable gates which could be secured into these openings, making the whole interior of the barge a safe place for play. I would ride my little tricycle, racing madly around the freight house, weaving figure eights around the center poles, holding up the roof rafters. Sometimes my sister and I would play on a pair of swings my father had rigged up from the sturdy rafters. He had made a pulley arrangement which he would use to hoist the swings out of the way when the freight was being carried. We were never allowed into the freight area when loading or unloading was going on. It was too dangerous. Peeking through a small pane in the freight house door, I could see the stevedores with their hand trucks scurrying about, carrying crates, barrels, roll-up sacks. Once in a while, when we were tied up alongside a ship, my father would open the roof hatchways and slings full of cargo would be lowered directly onto the deck. The presence of cargo did not hinder our play. Indeed, it sometimes made it much more interesting. We could play hide and seek in or climb onto an ever-changing playground of crates, barrels, and sacks. Sacks were the most interesting because they were soft and contained cocoa, coffee, grains, and who knows what exotic items, which smelled so intriguing. So that was he was lived on the water until he had to go to school. So about 1927, and then moved to onshore apartment. And it was I don't know if you have.
I think we've got some photos of
yeah.
your father and his sister here, and it looks like a dog as well.
Yeah, he had several dogs, and so that's my grandfather Claudio and his wife Louisa. Next. Yeah, so there, I obviously don't know where these are, but they're clearly down on the docks. That's my dad and my Aunt Loretta, his sister, who was a year younger.
They're on the rooftop of the barge. Right?
Probably, yeah. So he later moved to a barge that had a rooftop apartment. And he said it was very easy. They just docked the 2 boats right next to each other. Everything got moved over and they were done.
Those are ladder climbing dogs, it looks like.
Yeah, some of his stories were about, well, he got into trouble. He almost drowned in a barrel once, but some other captain saw him fall in and pulled him out. The other story I've told a few people. So he had relatives and uncle and cousins in not too far from here in Sunset Park in Brooklyn. So one Sunday they were docked. The barge was in Weehawken. My grandfather had the day off, and so they took a trolley down to Hoboken, got on what we now call the PATH train over to Manhattan, got on what is now the R train down to Sunset Park, visited the family, spent the whole day, did the repeat trip all the way back to Weehawken, barge not there. My grandfather calls up the dispatcher, oh, we moved it to Bush Terminal, Sunset Park. So they had to repeat all the way back down. So that was some of the uncertainty. You never quite knew where you were gonna end up.
I think we have a photo also of the cabin on the roof there. Is that what we're looking at here on the right?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know for sure even who those, I think those people are friends of the family. Looks like there's a tugboat behind it. The one on the left is my dad with my grandparents, his parents. I didn't know either. My grandfather died on the barge that he was working on in 1941, so obviously I didn't know him. He was what, 69 years old, so it was not an easy life. He died at I forget the pier number. It's I think where Google's building out on the west side on like 50, just
like
north of that.
54.
Yeah, 50 be 55 or 56, one of those. It's a pier that's not there anymore, but that's where his barge was docked when he passed away.
Now we've got a couple more family photos here that we can look at, and what about, did you and your father, did your father ever take you to the harbor and show you around, and what were your interactions with him around the working waterfront?
Well, of course, he wasn't working. My dad ended up going into broadcasting and worked for CBS and then ABC, and actually Voice of America during war, and then got an engineering degree and was doing those sorts of work. But I remember growing up in New Jersey and driving in with him sometimes to work, driving down the old West Side Highway and seeing all the piers sort of burned down and collapsing, and he would be talking to me about all these things and piers and what, and I would just be zoning out, not having any idea as my children have done to me. So, but later on, I actually went into transportation as a career and started to get more interested in some of the history of this. I volunteered on the Hudson River Clearwater, so I was in the harbor a few times on that, and got more interested in the history and talked to him a lot more about, and really learned a lot from him and encouraged him to write some of this down. And he talked about the chest. He had a number of things from his father that he donated to Dave and the barge over the years. And then when he passed away, and then we moved down to Washington, D.C. a few years ago, clearing out my mom's house, found some more items that I know belonged to my grandfather. So we brought some old carpentry tools and just some cool stuff, big wooden mallets and things like that. So we definitely want to support this effort to keep this alive and interesting.
Well, we really appreciate it, and really appreciate all you've brought to us and the stories that we've been able to pass on. We have a couple of minutes. Does anyone have questions in the audience, or anyone live streaming want to add your questions to the chat there? Yeah. Well, let me bring a microphone to you.
I'm assuming that the barge captain's obviously so the barge captain, I'm assuming, obviously in charge of the whole barge. I would assume maybe the number one thing is kind of security. Is that just to have a family living on a barge? Is that?
Well, I think the family part. I mean, I don't exactly know what my grandfather did because it was a long time before I was born. I learned some today with what you were talking about. But I think the family part was just to encourage. It was a benefit to try to get people to do this. So what my dad said was there were some barges had a very small living quarters for single males, but then the larger ones were for those that had families, and it worked for until they had to go to school, and that's where. But actually, and it fits with what you were saying about was not a bad income then and during the Depression, probably a stable environment. What my dad wrote is they had an apartment in Brooklyn, and he was actually born in that apartment in Brooklyn. I don't know what they did with it. I know they moved a lot to different apartments after they moved to shore, and then eventually my grandfather rented a house, a farmhouse up in Northvale, New Jersey, on the Erie Railroad, so they could have the transportation benefits. But I think living on the barge with the family, to your question, was for employee benefit to get more people to do that.
Yeah. All right. Are there any other questions from the audience here or in the chat? All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, I don't see that, but thank you. Second. Oh, here we go. Question from the chat. How were barge families engaged with the larger community? Was there a community of barge families, or was it more like living in a lighthouse?
Well, I don't know too much about it, but I do know that it certainly wasn't a lighthouse, because there are some stories in what my dad wrote about them interacting with other barges they were tied up next to. And including the one time that he almost drowned playing in the barrel and falling in. And the other captain on the other boat saw that and pulled him out. So I do believe they had friends that were on other barges and probably got a bit of community, although it was an ever-changing community. I don't know that he never talked about other children that he might have played with, but it was just a very active harbor. I mean, so I always try to think about how this place would have been filled with boats and ships and how active it was in the 20s. When my dad was on there, it was 1922 to 1927. So not quite, missed your census, the 1930 census, but that whole period.
And as Minda mentioned, I work with the Seamen's Church Institute as their archivist. And they have a lot of stories in the records of the Seamen's Church Institute about barge families. They're always turning up. They're always good for a story. And they also talk about canal boat families. And apparently there were some interactions between those, although it was a little bit of a, there was kind of kept with the barges or kept with the canal boats, just in part because of where they were moored. But there was definitely, we have a lot of stories there about the family scene. We have a couple more slides. Just want if you could narrate those as we run through them, and then we'll go to our next guest.
So this is my dad and his sister back in the, probably about that era, or maybe just when they moved ashore. That was my dad at his first communion, I believe. And then next one is his high school graduation. So he went to high school in Tenafly, New Jersey, because that was the regional high school at the time. And then eventually, I grew up. He bought a house in the next town over, where I grew up. But then they converted his whole high school into condos, and he had to live in his high school. So that's where he lived till he died. So he loved high school. This I don't.
Looks like a 1942 draft card.
This was in something else that my dad must have given earlier. I didn't say that this time, but yes, this was. So they lived, and I've looked at the 211 Carroll Street. I don't think that has been replaced by new buildings. But we had. He gave me some of the names. I lived in Brooklyn for 30 years, and he never quite understood why I'd want to move back to Brooklyn. I mean, his was like to get to New Jersey was his goal. So. So there's my dad and my kids, probably just a couple of years before he passed away in the 2000s. Paula and Louise are back there, so they're a little bit older.
Great, thank you very much. Really appreciate you joining us today. Well, we did have one more question in the chat here. I'll pass that on to, I'm sure other people can speak to that as well. So I'll make sure we get that question to the next group. And also from the captain wants to make sure everybody here knows, because it is a very hot day here, that there is water in the back if you need that. But we're going to go to our next guest, who is not here with us in person. He is joining us via Zoom. Okay, and he'll be with us in just a moment on Zoom. Actually, while we're setting that up, we'll prepare folks for one of the questions we had from the audience, and maybe you can think about this. Those of you who have experienced and know this popular question around boats: what about toilets, running water, and electricity on the barge? Where did the family shop for food and clothes? It sounds like a lot of power came from the coal stove, and water coming in came from barrels, and so electricity doesn't sound like it was really part of the story. And water going out, well, there's a lot of water around us, so but those are definitely issues we have to deal with on boats. Our last guest today, or next to last guest, we'll sneak them in before they have to leave for another event. Lived on a working barge a lot more recently, so they can speak a little more to some of the questions about electricity and sewage going out. And Andrew, how are we doing? Okay, we're working out a couple last details with our sound So our next guest is over on Puget Sound.
Hello, hello, ahoy. Hello, hello. Are you hearing me?
It should say down here, accept.
No, I'm fine. Are you getting my voice? Hello, hello.
Yes, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So we're going to put you up on the big
Oh.
screen here.
So folks here, just bear with a little bit of a delay as Andrew relates our questions. We're all set, Andrew. My first question is going to be if you'll tell us his name, his date of birth, and his connection to the harbor.
Okay, my name is Tudolf Torgerson, and
We just
I'm
got
known as Torgy. I'm known as Torgy because it's easier for people. I was born in 1937 in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. My connection with the Lehigh Valley Railroad barges is that my dad was a captain on a gas hoister. My one of my uncles was the captain on a barge like the one that many of you are on now. And another uncle, so the older uncle was Ludwig Christian Nasdal. He was born in 1881. He came from Norway and pretty soon, I think, worked for the Lehigh Valley Railroad. Then my father's brother, Torvald Georg Torgerson, Norwegian. He was also on one of the covered barges. And I said my dad was on a gas hoister.
And I love all the Norwegian names. Takes us back to Old Bay Ridge. Was Bay Ridge very Norwegian when you were a kid?
I didn't get the question about Bay Ridge. Well, Bay
Let me see if
Ridge
I
was
can
a
get
Scandinavian.
So was Bay Ridge very Norwegian when you were a kid?
Very much so. It was a Scandinavian colony. The kids spoke Swedish and Norwegian on the streets. As I got a little older, our family moved to South Ozone Park in Queens, but I had aunts and uncles who remained in the Bay Ridge area.
And what do you remember about your relatives working on the barges? And did you get to go onto the barges yourself, particularly?
I did. So I'm going to back up a little. So I recall my eldest uncle. He was the one who was born in 1881. He and his wife lived on a barge for some time. I don't know how long, with their 3 kids. And my other uncle, George, he lived on a barge for a short period of time with his wife and 3 children. There was a question earlier I saw that came up that people were wondering about water and toileting, sewage. And the water supplies were these 50-gallon or something like 50-gallon wooden barrels that were fed by water coming off the roof, the roofs of the barges. And on my dad's boat, which was a gas hoister, the cabin, it was an uncovered boat except for the cabin area. And so, but my dad did not live on the boat. He just stayed on it during the day. So water for these, commonly there was a water spigot someplace on shore for these families or for the men who were working on them. And they would have to just carry a couple buckets full of water if they wanted that. I don't know what they did about washing and showering or anything. It was, at any rate, the toileting was pretty simple. It was a bucket. And even in like the 1950s, it just went over the side.
Yep, that sounds right. We had a question here. I'm sure a couple of folks are thinking this, and somebody on chat put the question in. What is a gas hoister?
Okay, the gas hoister, it was, I think, a little larger barge than what you're on. It was closer to 100 feet, I think, and about 30 feet wide. At one end, it had a cabin that contained the lifting engines for loading and unloading. So there was a mast and a boom. The mast was, oh my gosh, the mast must have been 30, 40 feet tall, and then a boom, which was taller than that. The mast at the deck, the diameter, it was probably 2 feet in diameter. Anyway, in the gas hoister, in that cabin, there was a single cylinder gasoline engine. I can remember to this day going with my dad, and it was always scary because this is a really noisy thing. The gasoline engine was huge. It had 2 great big flywheels, heavy steel flywheels that were maybe 4.5, 5 feet in diameter. So in order to start the engine, my dad would, I guess I didn't know exactly what he did then, but he would advance the throttle, turn on the gas, the gasoline flow. He would then turn the flywheel to where there was some compression, and then he would step up onto the spoke of this thing to get the flywheel to spin. And then he quickly had to step off the spoke if the engine started, or else he would have been thrashed to death. Oh yeah, there's a picture of it.
How about that? It's one of our models in our collection.
Oh, about that, I love it. And so this engine and starting it was scary. I'm sure that at times men slipped a foot through the spoke and they would have just been thrashed to death. It was, anyway. So when they were running the hoisting equipment, my dad would sit on a wooden bench a little to one side of the engine, and he would be controlling with counterweighted pedals and levers. He would be controlling the lifting of the boom or the positioning of the boom, which was one set of controls, and then the actual hoisting equipment. So there were two sets of controls. Then to swing the boom, there were either one or two mates who were also in the cabin. And part of the mechanism, there were these slowly turning capstans. And they had pieces of hawser wrapped around the capstans. And so in order to swing the boom right or left, they would throw another coil on the capstan on one side to pull the boom over. So the captain and the one or two mates were coordinating, not by voice, but kind of just intuitively knowing what they had to do in order to get the lifting mechanism above a load. And then there would be 2, 3, or 4 mates on deck who were throwing slings around big crates. And these crates were big. I mean, they could hold a car. And they were, so they were moving the crates either from the barge and to the shore, or from the barge to another barge, or even lifting loads out of a ship next to them, lifting the load out and then putting it down on the barge. Well, that's essentially, it was really noisy. In the summertime, it got really hot in the hoisting room. And so they had this huge barn door that completely opened up the back of the engine compartment, the engine room. It was the size of a cabin. It was maybe 12 feet by 25 feet. Let's see.
We're going to bring up a couple more slides. Maybe you can tell us about what we're looking at here. You sent us some great documents.
Yeah, that model was really neat.
I appreciate that you were telling us about the capstans and us being able to see what that looked like on the deck. That was great. So let's see if we've got a couple of slide with a bunch of documents. And let's see here.
Oh yeah, this is a piece that I wrote some time ago for you guys. When I learned about you guys, I thought, gee, I can tell my story, because I thought, who the heck is even going to care? At any rate, there are some corrections. I think my dad, he was not naturalized until 1938, a year after I was born. And I was wondering, how could he work for the Lehigh Valley Railroad if he was not naturalized? So I don't know. And during the time, the early years, it was the World War II, wartime, 1940 to 1945, 46. And I did not go on the barges until maybe 46, because it was wartime. And so the docks and everything were heavily guarded. And my dad needed passes. Everybody needed passes to come and go. And they didn't want kids there, of course. But I remember it must have been in like 45, no, it must have been in 1946. I remember going to work with my dad, and we lived on Long Island at that time. It was a long trip. We took buses and trains, and we got to the dock, the pier, where he was where his boat was. And I recalled there was on the pier a long fence of barbed wire, behind which were hundreds and hundreds of men in long woolen gray or olive coats. And I said, Daddy, who are those men? And all he said was prisoners. And so these were POWs who, Germans and Italians who were taken to New York Harbor and then were, dispersed to prison camps in the United States. And my suspicion is that the guys I saw were awaiting transport back to Europe at the end of the war. I don't know, but it was something like that. So you can see, let's see, a couple of these are security cards. God, my dad looks like a thug. Oh man. Anyway, yeah, my dad looked like a thug. Well, look at these pictures. At any rate, it's interesting. So one of these cards down the lower right-hand corner, it's William Spencer and Son Corporation. And I can remember as a child, at times my dad said, I have to call Spencer. Well, I thought Spencer was a person, but it turns out that Spencer, I think, was the company who did they were it was a bookkeeping company, and they paid the salaries, I think. There's another thing about that I thought of when the earlier person said, they were never sure where a barge, their barge was going to be. I remember every morning my dad would call Stella. And I can remember to this day, he would call on the phone. He'd say, "Hello, Stella, there is barge number 473 this morning." And Stella, who was the dispatcher, she would tell my dad where the boat, where his barge would be, because it would move overnight oftentimes. At any rate, it is so embedded in my mind that Stella was this person my dad called every working day of his life.
You mentioned Spencer and Son, and we've had people on this barge tell us that they worked for a stevedoring company called Spencer and Son, and worked on this particular barge. In fact, we have graffiti that we keep backstage, left by a crew from Spencer and Son. So I wonder if that helps you. Does that match your memories and help you understand maybe what your father was referring to?
Yeah, I don't know why he was calling Spencer's. I mean, he worked for the Lehigh Valley Railroad. I don't know why he would be calling it, but it was embedded in my memory that my dad would call them every once in a while. This is interesting. Minda must have found this. Oh,
She's a great sleuth. Yeah.
no kidding. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, it's my dad came across on the Bergens Fjord, and he was working as a server or something. So he worked his way. He worked his passage by being a server from Norway on the Bergens Fjord, which was one of the two big vessels in the Norwegian line, the Bergens Fjord and the Oslo Fjord. Interesting.
We got a couple of documents Minda may have dug up here, so let's bring those up.
Oh, 986 54th Street, Brooklyn. Gee, that's interesting. So my, 986, So I don't know, let's see. So he was at 39 years of age. He had moved to South Ozone Park. That's interesting.
Let's see what the next one does for you. Straight show and tell. You bet your life here.
I'll be darned. Yeah, there's my mom's name, Katinka, Lehigh Valley Railroad. So, and the date of this is
It's the 1942 draft card.
yeah, okay. Draft card, son of a gun. 1898, Bergen, Norway. Bingo.
Got one more look at a draft card here that a little more. So yeah, we've dug up all kinds of information. What you said you got on the barges a bit. Were you working on the barges or were you just visiting on the barges?
Oh no, I was just a child. I was just there because it was a hell of a lot of fun. And it was dangerous. I don't think my mother knew that. But I loved it. So I would go with my dad, and there's a little cabin, you know, like 6 feet by 12 feet. It had a little stove, and he would have coffee on all the time. I don't know. It was like glue. It was, I think he just used it from day to day and just added more water and added more coffee. But it was interesting at times. Some of the other bargemen, they would get together and have coffee, and they were speaking Norwegian. There are a lot, my sense was there are a lot of Norwegians who were bargemen. And they had nicknames for each other. Well, my dad's name was Bjarne, but they called him Barney. And there was another guy they called Silkut Harry, and Silkut Harry. I thought, what the heck is that? Well, his nickname was Silk Hat Harry. Well, what, you know, where do these things come from? I don't know. But when I was on board, one of the things, my favorite pastimes was I would halfway up the boom, there was a shiv, a pulley, with a single line through it. And it was like a 1-inch hawser with a big eye, an eye spliced in one end. So I would sit in, when I was quite young, I would sit in the eye, and my dad would hoist me 30 feet off the deck, and I'd be sitting in this. I was like 8 years old, gosh. And he would hoist me up there, and I would sit there and I would swing. And then as I got a little older, I would hoist myself up there. And, you know, just one slip and I'd have come smashing down on the deck. I mean, it's just crazy. When the deck was covered, you know, when my dad had a lot of freight on the deck, there could be these huge wooden crates, and they'd be piled maybe double or 3 layers and covered the deck, but there were always spaces between the boxes. And it created these mazes, which was a lot of fun for me to, you know, just make my way around these puzzle-like mazes. And at times I would climb up to the second and third level to the top of these things. I'd be like 24, 25 feet above the deck. And I thought it was great fun. The other thing I did is I would go below decks at four corners of the barge. There were these grates, wooden grates. And they were really heavy for like a 10-year-old, but I would lift the grate and go down into the hold. The hold, as I recall, was partitioned into three or four long corridors, sort of the length of the vessel. And it was crisscrossed by timbers to give the deck strength. And I would climb from timber to timber, the whole length of the vessel, make my way into another thing. I would be under there for like a half hour. It was all, there was always water in the bottom, like 2 to 4 inches of water, kind of oily, stinky water. But a kid of 10 doesn't care. At any rate, those are some of the remembrances.
We did have one question from the chat. Was the ship your dad came over on a passenger ship, or was that a freight ship?
No, it was a passenger ship. And so he was working in the cafeteria, or the dining rooms, and he worked as a server, a waiter.
I love your story about playing below decks. We've heard from the Capiros about playing on the deck when the freight is out of here, when the decks are clear. And now I've never heard of anyone playing below decks. That's
Well, you should take a look below deck where you're sitting, Stefan, and
we'll get into that with one of our later guests. As a matter of fact, I heard one giggling over there, and I think they were thinking about their below decks here. So yeah, stick around. We will make sure we give you a little sense of the below decks here.
Oh, there's one other. My wife has said one other thing. There were quite a few times when my dad would, over the many years he worked on the barge, there were times when he would report that they had found dead bodies floating. Accident, I don't know. They were rough communities. The people who worked, many of the people who worked on the piers and on the boats it was a tough community, and they had, there were a lot of problems. Anyway, that was something that my dad had mentioned.
Were you aware of it being dangerous in the waterfront? Was it something you experienced, or more that you heard about?
No, it was what I heard about, and all of the bargemen, they were always really friendly. I have an idea that the different ethnic groups among the bargemen, they hung out together. Norwegians hung out with Norwegians. The Scandinavians hung out with each other. The Italians hung out with each other. I think there were some Greeks. There were some Germans. So there were, I think there were these ethnic groups that really hung out together and helped each other. Because many of them were really not very fluent in English. And they learned different things, and they told the newcomers.
Great. Does anyone have any questions here in the house on the barge? Well, I'm sure as you think of other stories, we'll look forward to hearing from you about them. Feel free to call us anytime or send us a note to as things come to your mind, and we'll look forward to getting more stories from you and sharing them with other folks. We really appreciate your joining us today.
Thanks so much.
And our next guest is Gerard Canty. So we'll come on up here. We'll talk about Captain William Canty and another Lehigh Valley Railroad barge, the number 63.
Hi.
Welcome.
I really didn't know I was going to speak.
Sorry, just give us 1 second.
I didn't know I was going to speak,
Oh, okay, that's all right.
but I really don't know much about the barge because all I know is that my dad said look at the barge and I don't know how long. But he used to tell me that there was a 5-floor apartment upstairs.
Even that alone is interesting for our audience at home, so we want to make sure they hear it. Right, I think looks like we're good. All right, so Gerard, you were saying that you didn't know a lot about your father, and
Sorry. Gotta be that close? Yeah, sorry. Okay.
but tell us what you did learn about your father and his work on the barge.
Well, he was a barge captain for a short time. He started on the Lehigh Valley in 1941. His father was a barge captain. So, my father used to tell me stay in school. He always said he stayed in school, but obviously he didn't because he was down there when he was 16 years old working. And he told me he was a barge captain for a short while. He actually was a deckhand on the tugboats. And he retired from that when Conrail took over. But
And what was your father's name?
Eddie Canty, Tugboat Eddie, they used to call him. Well, Eddie the horse, they used to call him, because he used to like to gamble. Anyway, he was a good man, my father. But he used to take me on the boats when I was a kid, you know what I mean, the tugboats. I was like 13. It was in Jersey City where I first met this gentleman here with the barge in Liberty State Park.
Yeah.
There used to be old railroad yards. It was the CNJ in the Lehigh Valley. And my father used to take me on the boats when I was 13, and he made a line up for me, a 3/4 inch line. He had a guy splice it for me to teach me how to throw the lines and all that stuff. And it was fun. He taught me how to well, he didn't teach me, but he let me drive the tugboat, you know what I mean? It's only one click at a time. It's not like a car, you know what I mean? When I went downstairs, all the guys were saying the coffee was going all over the place. You know? But my father, like when I was growing up, sometimes you feel a little inadequate because, like somebody else's father's like a cop or a doctor or something like prestigious, you know what I mean? So my father was a railroader. You know what I mean? He was a deckhand on the tugboats, but what's that? The salt of the earth. He was a regular Joe. You know what I mean?
This was
they're
the
the
Lehigh
kind of
Valley.
guy. They're the kind of guys that built the country. You know what I mean? And he used to drive the tugboat like when the captain was having coffee. He drove it in the fog and stuff, and it used to amaze me just from the buoys and the whistles. He used to be able to drive the tugboat. So I really don't know a lot about the barges, to be honest with you. This is more about the tugs.
That's all right. We'll take it.
So-
And what was this for the Lehigh Valley?
Lehigh
Railroad?
Valley,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
I was on the Cornell. That was a tugboat. It's still in operation. It's in Kingston, New York, I believe. And the Lehigh, they sunk. I think it's a reef. And the Bethlehem, that was the last tug they had. That's the one when I was 17, I was out of school. I was working here and there in the shipyards in Hoboken, wherever I could get money. So the tugboats was a dying craft. And in 1974, my father said, let me bring my son down there, because they needed a guy. So I worked predominantly in the winter, like November, December, January, February, and March, and it was a great job. It was a great experience, you know. It was, you know, them type of guys that they're talking about here. They were the kind of people who taught me good work ethics, and good values. You know what I mean? When I was a kid, one time I went out drinking one night, and I didn't make work the next day. And my father said, "Why you got to go to work?" Because they need a 3-man crew. So I didn't make work. And the next day when I went to work, the captain, I was sitting in the galley playing solitaire. You know what I mean? And the captain came down and he said to me, "Gerard, you're making too much money." And I couldn't even look at him. You know what I mean? But I never let that happen again. You know what I mean? And it just was a good experience. And my father used to bring me down there, and I worked for the Lehigh Valley for like 2 years on and off. And I knew the railroad was a good job, and the pay was good, and you didn't kill yourself. And for a regular Joe, whatever, it was an all right job. Good benefits, good pension. So I had to rehire in Conrail in 1976, and I worked for them for 41 years, and then I retired in 2017. And my father used to, I'm retired 5 years already. So, you get railroad retirement. It's a good pension, health care and all that. It was a good life, but I really don't know much about the barges, like I said. My father was a cool guy. A lot of people liked him. So in Liberty State Park years ago, he used to bring all the guys on the boat. He brought a dog on the boat. The guys would tell me, "That's your father?" I said, "Yeah, that's my father, Eddie Canty." They said, "He brought us all on the boat. He brought the dog and everything." They were all drinking. That's the type of guy he was. They were all down there picnicking, and he brought everybody on the boat. But I worked with Sal Notarelli, who helped the website. Yeah, I don't know if you know Sal. He was the captain when I worked there. There was another captain named Walter Rombowski, and there was another captain, Gas Patrick. I don't know if that's his first name and his last name, or just his last name. I really don't know. But it was a great experience. It was. We used to go to Long Island City, Queens, to bring the floats over there. It's still over there. You can see the big float bridge over there from Jersey City. And
So this is putting railroad cars from barges.
yeah, we
into
used to do the
railroad system.
floats.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
didn't have barges. We used to use floats.
Yeah.
Well, they had barges before I got there, but the floats was like a flat car with railroad tracks on it. And they used to put them in the float bridges. They'd raise the float bridges for whatever the tide was, high tide, low tide. And they'd load them up with fresh cars. And that's how they used to bring the freight over to Manhattan. They used to have all kinds of, they used to call them off-track yards, like, just like a yard like on the East River or the Hudson River. All the railroads have them. And my father was like a character, you know what I mean? So they used to bring hops to Schaefer Brewery up in the East River. So my father would say, "Yeah, Captain, can we stop in and get some Schaefer?" You know what I mean? And Captain would say, "No, not today, Eddie. You know what I mean? Not today." So then they would make it a little more difficult on him, you know what I mean? So the next time they go up to Schaefer Brewery, they'd say, "Cap, can we go in and get some Schaefer?" He says, "All right, Eddie, make it quick." But that's all really I have to say about it. You know what I mean? To be honest with you, I don't have no literature on it or nothing. You know what I mean?
You talk about barges and tugs from that era. Did your father ever talk about the big story with tugs in the harbor in the 40s? It was the tugboat strike, which has crippled the city. I mean, is that something you have any stories about?
He never told me about that. He used to tell me like the tugboats up in the East River, like up in the Bronx terminal. They used to have shorter smokestacks because the bridges were lower and stuff like that. He told me a lot of stuff, but I liked him. He was good. He'd come home at night and say, "Make sure you close your windows because we're getting a westerly wind. It's going to rain." And, he knew all kinds of stuff like that. You know what I mean? So the rain don't come in the window. Do you remember that, Marge? He used to say that kind of stuff. But
Well, I think we got a couple of photos you might be able to help us out with. So if Andrew will bring those up for us here. There we go.
that's my grandfather,
So that's your grandfather.
Captain Bill.
So William Canty, Bill Canty.
You got my picture of my dad too?
See, well, let's see what else we got. We got some research here. So it looks like a little bit out of the census. So it shows William as a barge captain, and Nettie is his wife. And did I read correctly? Nettie was born on a boat. No,
I
okay.
really don't know.
We
that.
got more of the story. Born on a boat at the foot of Washington Street, just like we were talking about before with our research about so Washington Street comes up. Let's see what we got for the next slide here. So birth record, our intrepid archivist doing all kinds of work here, 1902. And our next slide goes back into the census, listed as a driver for a department store, 1920. And what else we got here? More census records. 1940, listed as a signalman for the railroad. And those draft cards always come in handy, so we've got a draft card listing here. So, Bill Canty, 101 Waverly Street in Jersey City. Some fans in Jersey City. More draft card there. And we got one more census record to 1950, I should say, as a boat captain for railroad. And Edward Canty, deckhand, right there. Now let's see, we've got a great photo here too.
I got that picture.
So who is this in this photo?
That's Captain Bill, and that's my dad, the younger one.
That's your dad there.
He used to always have the cashmere cap, and in the summer he used to wear the linen ones. He was a sharp dresser.
Cashmere in the winter and linen in the summer. I love it. That's great.
You know, one time, I'm sorry.
And this is his birthday?
Yeah, today's my dad's birthday. You know, one time I was with my dad, and he was telling me, you know, he had like a little bit of a way with the women. So like he was telling me how the girls were saying to him, "Oh, Eddie, we got to go. Captain Bill's here. Captain Bill's here." You know, because he was coming down to meet my father. You know what I mean? So they're saying, "Oh, Captain Bill's here." They know him from Union City. You know what I mean? So they says, "You know Captain Bill, Eddie?" He goes, "He's my father." You know what I mean? So they both got along with him. You know what I mean? But it was interesting the way he told me that.
Sounds like you got along with a lot of people.
Yeah, he did. He did.
Does anyone have any questions here in the barge? I know we've got some on chat. Let's see.
Oh, they used to have a Norwegian Day parade at Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. We used to go to it every year. They used to terminate McKinley Park.
There's the Norwegian Day Parade in
Bay Ridge.
Bay Ridge, yeah.
Because we were born over there. It was last weekend.
Last weekend. Here we go. So they
Last
still do it.
weekend, yeah.
Let's see. Question. I live along the Hudson. Sometimes see tugs and barges sitting there for days at a time. And why are there tugs and barges sitting in the Hudson for days at a time? Do you know that answer to that?
I wouldn't really know, to be honest with you.
So some folks here saying they're waiting for loads or to depend. I'm sorry. We're waiting for orders. It depends if the barge is riding high in the water, they are waiting to refill, and if it's riding low, they're waiting to take it someplace. Also, a question: what kind of training or credentials were needed to work on a barge or a tug? What was your experience with training and credentials?
Well, my dad showed me how to throw a line when I was a kid. You know what I mean? So, and basically, like, they kind of, you learn on the job. It's on the job training. Oh, I'm sorry. It's on the job training, kind of, you know what I mean? But it was the tugboats was very dangerous, man. When they were towing something, if them lines snapped, they would cut you right in half. I seen my father get knocked over. It only slipped off the bit one turn, hit him in the stomach. My dad was a big guy. He had a big welt on his stomach like that. He had to go to the hospital. But guys get like their face, you know, messed up, and their wrists and their arms when the line snapped, you know what I mean? But I was a floatman, so I used to have to go out on the floats and take the serial numbers. If I would have went overboard in the wintertime, I would have been dead. You know, because it's all ice and snow. It's lisps to one side, lisps to the one side, you know what I mean? because of, it's uneven, you know what I mean? If you go overboard, you're dead. My father went overboard in 16-degree weather. But he's
Just to
okay.
make sure the folks at home got that. So your father went overboard in 16-degree weather.
Yeah, in 16-degree weather.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you remember him coming home? Do you remember hearing about that?
No, I was younger.
Yeah.
But, and his friend Howie Cosman went overboard in cold weather. And the ice floes came together and hit him on the side and busted them all up and stuff.
Wow.
But, yeah, it was dangerous. It was a dangerous job, especially in the wintertime, with all the ice and snow and everything. But, my dad was telling me, like, when he used to get up, like, he'd wake up in the morning, he didn't know where he was going to wake up. So he used to have to take the ferries to school. He might wake up in Jersey City, Hoboken, Brooklyn. He'd have to take the ferries to Manhattan. But when I was a kid, one of my friends fell off the cliffs. We went overlooking Hoboken. My friend fell off the cliff 110 feet and died.
Wow.
So when I went home to tell my dad about it, because I was crying, I was young, and he shared with me that when he was taking the ferry to school in the morning, there was two brothers that he used to go to school with. I guess they lived on the barges too, and one of them pushed the other brother, and he fell and he got run over by a truck, because they used to have trucks on the old ferries, you know what I mean? So, things happen in life, It was, growing up with them type of guys, it's a good experience. Like the woman said, the salt of the earth kind of guys, you know what I mean? It's important. It really is. They don't make them like that no more.
No, that's why we're doing this.
They don't make them.
And I've got one question from our archivist here. So.
I just want to know more about being a floatman, about your own.
Well, I was a deckhand, but I used to, when the tug used to pull up to the floats, that's where they had the boxcars. I used to hit I used to release the stern line and the bow line. And then when we put it in the float bridge, I used to hook up the rack line. That's to keep it steady in the river so it don't go sideways, because they're long and bigger than this, way bigger than this. You can fit like 6 or 7 boxcars on one. And then I go up I'm sorry. And then I go up the front and I would help my father with the winch lines. They had these big chains and they used to tighten them up, and then you threw out a couple other. My father was he was the first mate. So just from the whistle, like he would blow the whistle, and the captain would know how far to come in, how much power to give, up a little that. And he's like all the way down at the end, like 200 feet away. You know what I mean? He was 100 feet, whatever they are. But it was a good job. It was a good job. It was a healthy job. I used to go all around the bay here. He used to take me. He said, "This is Buttermilk Channel. Buttermilk Channel's right around here." You heard of it, right?
Oh, yep.
Now, I was looking it up the other day. They said it was years ago when it was low tide. I don't know how true this is, what I read on Google. They used to bring the cows over there. Did you hear that?
That's a popular story. I've never seen a chart that suggests that was possible.
I don't know how true it is, but my father told me it was from the mud in that channel. When the tugboat went in there and it churned up, it was like a creamy color. That's what I remember. I don't know how true it is or not. That's why they called it Buttermilk Channel, But
I like that story. That's good. I like that.
he used to tell me a lot of cool stuff. I forgot it all.
Are there any other questions here? Well, we'll definitely keep in touch with you. And as you remember more things and you want to stop by with the stories anytime, you're more than welcome.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to switch up the order a little bit, Andrew. I want to get a couple of guests in here who need to leave in a moment. So we're going to go next to Dahlia and Sophie Sharps. So we'll bring in another chair here. And they'll be talking about a working barge that works a little differently. They're going to go, and Harvey, yes, it's John J. Harvey. The dog, not the boat.
He was
Named after the boat. Harvey. I know this is. Yeah.
Move my chair the whole thing.
This is not your first time on this stage, but we'll treat you as we treat everybody here. So Why don't you tell us your name and the year you're born and your connection to the harbor, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Sophie Sharks. I am 27, and Dahlia and I grew up on this barge right here. Should we pass it back and forth? Is that better? He wants to see.
Sorry. Got the, actually, we have to get to Zoom.
Forget it. Go ahead. Hi, everyone. I'm Dahlia Sharps. I was born in 1992. I'm 30 years old, and I also grew up on this barge. We moved on when I was 1 and Dahlia was 3.
I think we're just gonna kind of run the photos while we're talking here. There's a lot of photos here from your time growing up, and some very normal photos of growing up like any kid in Brooklyn, and then some other photos that are a little more barge specific, unusual experiences. So I mentioned that this is a working barge, but we're not moving freight. So tell us about the work that this barge does and how you witnessed it and then were involved in it.
Sure. Yeah, so like Sophie said, we moved on when we were really little. And it was my dad's dream. I think both Sophie and I kind of know his spiel by heart by now. And when he would like pop over to Fairway or something and it was open hours.
And Fairway, that's
yeah, former, now Bogapa, formerly Fairway.
Well, that's the grocery store, just but that's in the old warehouse right close by here, right?
Exactly, thank you. And it was open hours. Sometimes Sophie and I would step in for him, and so we would, even at the age of like 7 or 8, be sort of like taking people around and like things are popping into my mind. Like he always would say, is it a labor of love or a love of labor? Or depending on the day, he bought the barge for $1 or he bought the barge for $500. I never really knew which it was going to be. Another one is the barge is 105 years old today. And he would say it for the whole year. And he would say that it was true because today it is 105. Sorry about my dog. I'll let Sophie answer the question a little bit more succinctly. No, not at all. I mean, I think one thing that comes to mind, and Dahlia and I had a lot of fun going down memory lane, looking through these photos. But for us, it is a little bit hard to disentangle growing up on the barge and then also growing up on a showboat. And, our dad mentioned that he was trained as a juggler and entertainer, worked on cruise ships for many years. And Dahlia and I grew up not only on the barge, but, as a part of the showboat. And then we also, you'll see something, well, there's a perfect example here, us each standing on our dad's head in our nursery school doing performances. So from very early ages, we have lots of videos of us sort of tumbling around, and pretty early on we got into acrobatics with a troupe in Brooklyn and became a part of their junior company, and then developed our own trapeze act, static trapeze. So not the large flying. The ceilings are low enough that we did a lot of doubles trapeze, and you'll see some photos of that as well. But it was incredibly special to grow up on this barge as a barge, and so special to hear about all of these stories. We have similar stories of biking around and the figure eights. So I learned what figure eights are because we would do our little loop-de-loops in winter and summer. We had a birthday party on the barge. Yeah.
We had the discussion a little while ago, and I think we don't have a lot of photos from below decks, but tell us about below decks. What's is it full of sludgy water, or what's it like below?
Yeah, like Sophie said, it's been amazing to hear these stories and to hear who lived on the barge before us and feel really connected to the barge's history. We grew up below deck, so you're right now in our living room / dining room / performance space / backstage / kitchen. But downstairs are where our bedrooms are, where we have a bathroom. Similar to what you were describing, it's sort of broken into four. And so there's like a hallway on each side closest to the outside. And then this is actually a story that I need to hear from Dad, because Sophie and I were kind of turning to each other and being like, did he convert the middle two sections into living space? Because basically it's railroad style. So from that side, it goes a bathroom to my parents' room, to my sister's room, to my room. And friends would always feel a little uncomfortable having to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night because they had to walk through Sophie's room, Mom and Dad's room to the bathroom. And my partner even now will like crawl through the outside because he feels so uncomfortable, going through all the rooms. So it was definitely an intimate living space. And then on this side, and I'll turn to Sophie, but is where both our parents had their like offices back when you needed a standing big computer. And yeah, they would work down there. Yeah. I was gonna say, I don't know too much to add, but one of my favorite things about the two spaces, both our bedroom, railroad style space, and then the office space on the other side, is Dahlia's bed growing up used to be lofted. And so it was way down back on this side, and on the and on the other side where our parents' office space was, there was a little ladder running, and in the very at the top corner of the wall, there was one open beam that either had been knocked out, or I'm not quite sure, but that was how we would go back and forth between the two sides. If you didn't want to walk all the way up and over and down, we would sort of pull our bodies and crawl through, or go feet first, more likely, and fold yourself in half and then go down the ladder. So that was always exciting.
It's like this big.
Yeah.
We had some pictures with gardening, so and that's sort of an issue with the barge. I think the thing that people love seeing here is that your dad has taken his old boots and turned them into flower pots, but this looks a little more terrestrial. So you had some land relationships. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we did, and actually you can see here, this barge we used to be docked right on Conover Street. Until 2002, we went up to Dad took the barge up to Albany, up to dry dock, and it was lifted out of the water. And the entire summer, which was really an experience for us because we sublet an apartment in Brooklyn and went up to visit him in Albany, back and forth on weekends sometimes. But we used to be right over there on Conover Street. We moved to around the other side of Red Hook to Columbia Street for a couple of years. When that pier actually fell in when we left, and then Dad and a number of people spent, I would say, a year or two maybe building up this rock jetty, which was just a pile of rocks for as long as we could remember growing up, into the pier that we have today.
What's your earliest memory of the barge moving someplace? An early memory of the barge being moved?
Ooh.
Tooth Fairy, your father says?
Dad's priming one of my memories. I don't know if that's my first memory, but it is a classic, which is that Sophie and I believed in kids, the Tooth Fairy for a long time. Tabitha was her name, and she had a really special envelopes, and she would leave us little tiny Tooth Fairy rings when she gave us our dollars under our pillows. And one year I lost one of my teeth, and the barge was part of the Atlantic Antic Festival at the foot of Atlantic Avenue. And so the barge had been taken by a tugboat from here all the way up to Atlantic Avenue. And I was excited and looking forward to waking up to my bounty, and it wasn't there. And Mom and Dad explained, and then and I was really, I think I was unhappy, and I let them know that, you know, that Tabitha hadn't come, and then the next night, I think, I woke up the next morning and I had a letter from Tabitha explaining that she had gotten really confused, that she had come to Red Hook, that she was all ready to deliver, you know, my gift in exchange for my tooth, and that she got really confused, but that she had gotten word that we were over there, and so she rectified things.
I appreciate your looking out for our younger audience before telling that story. But I don't think you revealed anything. I think we helped them. Oh, here we've got a great photo of the barge on the move. What do you remember about this photo?
Yeah, I'll let Sophie talk, but I'll just say that that moving on the barge is one of the most magical experiences in the world, and that we have really fond memories of doing it.
I think it was. I think this might have been going up to Kingston in maybe 2005. Dad's giving me a thumbs up back there. And I think Dahlia and I each maybe brought a friend, and as Dahlia mentioned, going up, you know, we went as short as to Brooklyn Bridge Park and Hudson River Park, and as far as Albany and all the way up the Hudson on different trips. Kingston was one of the early sort of long voyages that I remember and have so many fond memories. I mean, I think one of them, we loved going up on the roof, especially when we were underway, especially when we were about to go under a bridge. And sometimes we were so high up that we would be able to either, I tell myself that we were able to touch the bottoms of the bridges. I don't know that we actually were, but some of them were really low, especially as you go up there and get as close as Albany and in the narrower areas. But that was really exciting. We loved sleeping on the roof. We would bring all our sleeping bags and our mats and everything, and make sure to tuck ourselves between the skylights so we didn't accidentally roll off in the night. And we would sleep up there, and I feel like I loved the idea of it, and it was always really fun. And we would stay up for hours, and we would go to sleep, and then in the morning at like 5 a.m. we would be scorched, by like, you know, the 5 a.m. bright morning sun and the slightly damp from the morning dew and bug bites. But it was always so exciting, and I was excited to do it again.
What any memories that you have to add to that? Then we do need to talk about what's on the screen.
Yes, lots of other memories, but I think that one of the really special ones was that when we were docked in Kingston, New York, I can't remember if it was because the mosquitoes were so bad, but it was like we could not sleep on the barge. We weren't going to be able to. And so we were up there for another like festival or some sort of like waterfront event, and they let us sleep in the Kingston Historical Museum. And we felt, my mom's favorite book is the Mixed Up Files of Basil E. Frankweiler, so it's called. And I think I butchered it, but they are in the museum, and I think that we felt like that. We were like sleeping underneath these really old historic paintings, which I guess is not that dissimilar from the barge, but it felt really, really special. And it was AC, and we didn't grow up with AC, and it was. Oh yeah, Sophie's saying we might not have had power that night.
So thank you for acknowledging that you live in a museum as well. But so we've seen pictures of people with dogs on barges, and what about your pets on the barge?
Yeah, we grew up with a lot of pets. Now that I think about it, we had guinea pigs at one time, and hamsters, and turtles. And Dad actually brought the turtles back from the sewage treatment plant. They, like, every time he went, they gave him really random things. And one time he came back with 2 turtles.
I want to talk about more of your pets, but you just said your dad went to the sewage treatment plant. So maybe we should talk about that.
That's all you. Yeah, I mean, the barge toilet is a unique invention. It's one that I didn't really like to tell friends about until they they were already really friends with me. They already liked my family. I don't know, they weren't gonna but people often like to lead with this fact when they talk about me, which is not not the way I like to be introduced to the world, but we have compost toilets, which means that we have a bucket with sawdust in the back that you put over top after you go to the bathroom. Sophie's actually made the sign in there. I think it's from like a decade ago. It's a complicated process of what happens to the buckets after they're used.
Would you like me to detail?
I mean, yeah, please tell us as much as you want to.
Well, so yeah, Dad waits for probably 6 months or so usually, and they're in 5-gallon joint compound buckets, and then goes on a haul with I don't actually know how many buckets each time, down to the Owl's Head sewer treatment plant, not far away in Bay Ridge. And Dahlia was just reminding me that there are a couple of people who have interned or volunteered on the barge. It's a little bit of a rite of passage to sort of go on that trip with Dad, although I will say I think both of us need to do that and haven't yet.
Oh, you haven't yet? Okay. So this is actually my story, more than yours at this point. So I've done that, I think, 3 or 4 times now.
There you go.
Okay, so this is a little different from the 1950s. We heard about people just tossing it overboard. Things have changed a little bit. Let's go back to your pets. So we had guinea pigs, and I forgot how we got into sewage with the turtles. Yes.
The turtles, and then after that came 3 consecutive bunny rabbits. I don't know how we quite landed on. Oh, I do know. Our first rabbit, Brownie Bean, sort of came to us. It was Dahlia's kindergarten school class pet, I believe, Brownie Bean. And at the end of the school year, Brownie Bean, I'm trying to remember, I guess the teacher, did we take him home for the summer, and the teacher ended up leaving and didn't come back the following year. And so we ended up with Brownie Bean for maybe 6 or 7 more years. And after that, we had Brooklyn for a short time. And then Dewey, who was pictured, who's right there. Who Dad always used to say was named after Admiral Dewey, and Dahlia and I disputed that because I think Dewey for us came from, for a long time, Dewey for a little while had 2 down ears when we first got him, and then 2 up ears for a while, would sort of hop along for the first few weeks alternating, and then all of a sudden just decided, he was gonna stay with 1 up ear and one down ear. So Dewey was down uppy and ended up being Dewey. But bunnies were really incredibly wise animals, and they would sort of crawl over to the edge and look over and just keep on doing their thing.
You would shake a Cheerios box and they would come like bounding from the back. That was our trick.
No, I understand. Your dad loves telling stories about Dewey and what a performer Dewey was. So
Yeah, they had a
lots of
tense
stories about
relationship.
Yeah. You said Brooklyn was there for a short time, but the rabbits didn't fall overboard. So this was not a barge-oriented short time.
No, I think he was like born with a parasite.
Yeah. Did either of you ever fall in?
No. I have a friend, my friend Caroline always claims that she fell in, but she didn't.
I think we may have seen a couple of photos of people swimming, however. We've got here's a nice boat photo. So boats were not just this boat, but smaller boats were they a part of your life as well? We've got a couple of boat photos here.
Yeah, very much so. And there's a sailboat docked right up back there that, as you can see, my birthday is in July, and my birthday party every summer always included a sailboat ride out and around. Although I think for me, sailing for our family a lot of the times meant motoring on out, finding a place that we really liked and putting up the sails and kind of just relaxing for a little while. And it wasn't until I got to college and saw people doing competitive sailing. I was like, whoa, those things can move. I didn't quite put together because we really relied heavily on our motor. And then we had our sails up, but it was more to have our sails up.
I want to get back to the working part of the barge. So you said that you went to like acrobatic school, right? Did I hear that?
Sophie and I joined an acrobatic performance troupe called Lava when we were really little. I think it started as like a after school program or a summer camp program, and then they had a junior troupe that they kept on, and we did it for like a decade. And these are photos of us, in addition to being part of a troupe of young women in like, I guess Prospect Heights is what it's called now. We had our own duo act called the Mermaidens.
And the Flying Mermaid is your father's.
I'm not sure about that.
So your dad talked earlier about how the barge was a performance space for him. How did your act work with his act? How did you how much did you perform on the barge or elsewhere? What role did the barge play in that part of your professional life?
Yeah, so some of these photos that you'll see growing up, there were circus Sundays in June, every Sunday in June, and that was sort of a feature of one of the things that happened in Red Hook and happened on the barge. It happened through, I think, when we were in high school, I would say, and that was definitely, either dad was performing or we were performing or we both were performing, which was really fun and exciting because we would grew up with him performing, and then when we started, we would be backstage all together. And so there were many times where we were doing an act, whether it was the two of us or with dad, but then there were also so many other times where we were selling tickets for the box office or just generally setting up and cleaning up the space and really being part of their Circus Sundays, really being part of every stage of the process.
Yeah, your mom did a lot to make today happen. So it's still, now you two don't live on the barge anymore, but if you're here, setting up for performances is part of living here. Yeah, all hands on deck.
The only thing I wanted to add was an entrepreneurial feat that I had. We used to have a music series called Sunset Music Series every Friday in July. I would sell posies, which were leaves that I had picked from the garden, and then I squeegeed my finger in the middle and put a little flower in between so that there was a flower sticking out of the leaf, and I would sell it to 25 cents to people who were coming onto the barge for the music series, and I made a killing.
I bet. How old were you at this time?
Maybe 6, 7.
That's a tough sell there. That's wow. Did anyone have any questions about for Delia and Sophie on life on the barge here? Or any questions for folks in the chat?
So what did you remember about the waterfront?
I'll repeat that for our audience at home. So the question is, what did you remember about the waterfront in general as you're growing up?
This was a really quiet area, specifically like on the barge. Like we would walk around naked, I feel like, with like the doors open, and you wouldn't be worried that anyone was gonna see ever. We would like go swimming off the side. I remember one time, my first time that I was allowed to like walk around with my friend Emily Simon. I don't know why I'm saying her. And dad let us take walkie-talkies, and we were allowed to go just we had to be within eyesight, but we could walk around, and that was an exciting day. But yeah, I mean, I think it was like a pretty tight knit, there was like Sunny and Tuna and Gary Baum and like all these people in our lives who were within a really close distance, and it felt like tight knit within the sort of like waterfront barge Ralphie and Pete. I mean, like there's
Yeah, who are
there's
some of these people you mentioned? Sonny and Tuna. Who are they?
colorful characters from the neighborhood.
Off the barge that I remembered, and there were all sorts of things that I started to, because we grew up, this was our norm, and so we knew that lots of things were maybe different, but it really was our everyday and all that we had ever known. And so it was when I lived on land for the first time that there were lots of little things that, one thing that I noticed was that when it was really foggy, I would sort of crave or almost create foghorn sounds in my mind because and growing up, I didn't really, you hear them, but they're sort of the background of the day and the background of life. And so that was definitely one example of just knowing that it was a unique upbringing. And then the other one that comes to mind is I remember going to friends' houses and going off to college. I was always like opening, or I run very hot in general, but I found myself always opening windows and opening doors and getting air. And you can see from these giant 4 and 10-foot doors that were, especially in the summer, just always left open. There's a constant breeze and a constant feeling of air and light and all of those things that I really started to miss and realize that it wasn't until I didn't have them that I realized how much I appreciated them.
I'm sure some of the folks here from Bay Ridge understand what you mean about the foghorns, which are clearly audible in Bay Ridge and places like St. George, where I grew up as a kid. So yeah, those are. Great. Any other last questions? Oh, yeah, over here.
Is it true that you guys, when you were kids, had a chore chart?
The question is about a chore chart. We learned a chore chart that they had as kids.
Do we have a chore chart? I don't know if that's true. I know that mom and dad tried to institute chore charts several times. I don't remember them going for very long. My mom was cracking up in the back. I'm so curious what you.
So stuff on the boat.
Whether we had to do
nautical
stuff on the boat.
specific things.
I mean, in this weird way, I feel like doing a lot of stuff on the barge felt like a badge of honor. Like Sophie and I really, really, really loved lifting and lowering the gangway and, feeling like we were part of the barge's everyday activities. Those weren't necessarily big things that would be on a chore chart, but I think we got excited about weddings and circuses and music performances because it meant we got to sort of see our home spring into action.
Did Torby's story about getting lifted into the air and then lifting himself into the air, did that have any resonance for you?
I don't quite remember this time, but I know that there are always stories that our parents tell about being lifted and lowered in buckets, especially going down to the sailboat when we were little. Now we sort of crawl down the side of the slats in the barge, sort of like a ladder. But when we were little and couldn't do that, even now it's a pretty big gap. We were definitely, those 5-gallon joint compound buckets come in handy for all kinds of things, and you're definitely. The clean ones, we were lowered and raised in not only all of our stuff, but us as well.
Well, I know we're at the end of the time that we intended to go. We're going to go a little longer. We have another guest we want to bring in, but do you have any last memories you want to share?
No, because I want to be able to hear the next folks, but just that we're here, and I think
this is the first time Sophie and I have been a part of something like this, and it feels really special to be connected to the lineage of the barge and the history of the waterfront.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll look forward to hearing more stories. So our final planned guest today, do we have Martha still with us today? Yep. Do you want to join us and share some stories? Thanks. So Martha's grandfather was Edward Kieran, worked on the Lehigh Valley Railroad number 314. And we'll get you set up here.
One thing I just
Before you get into it, if you wouldn't mind, just tell us your name, when you were born, and what your connection is to the harbor. Not everyone does math so well. Give us some important context. Oh.
Okay, it's not going to be recorded when I say year.
We'll leave it out later.
No edit.
Absolutely, we'll get it in post.
Ready? Sable. Good. All right. My name is Martha Lambert, and I'm born in 1950. And then what I'm originally.
And what's your connection to the harbor? Yeah.
Pardon?
Your connection to the harbor.
Oh, the connection. Oh, yes. Well, it was my maternal grandfather, my mother's father, Edward Caron, and born in Ireland, as was my grandmother and my mother. And they came over in 1922 and moved to Baltimore, worked for Baltimore Steel, my grandfather did. And then subsequently, because at that time, a lot of Irish immigrants kind of all stayed together wherever, wherever their hometown was. And if they migrated to one neighborhood, they, kind of all congregated there as well. So they wanted to come back into Manhattan, and my grandfather sought employment with the Lehigh Valley Railroad and subsequently became a captain of Barge 314. And I want to relate to Sophie and Dahlia's experiences, because it really touched my heart, because growing up, my mother's stories, my mother was second from the oldest, she was one of 9. 8 of them lived on the barge. Okay, so, and I'll detour for a moment, because I guess the management or whoever was in charge of the barge and the apartment that was on top of the barge saw fit to say to my grandparents, we're going to give you another room. So subsequently, they housed 8 children, varying in ages. Well, the 1930 census, my mother was 11. The oldest, Martha, was 15.
I think we have a photo of the census record there, just to give people a visual on what you're talking about here.
Okay.
But there are a few people, so yeah, let's see if we got that up. There we go.
So you can see my Aunt Alice was a newborn when this census was taken. My mother was 11, my Aunt Martha at 15. So they all varied in ages, but the relation of the stories that Sophie and Dahlia referred to, I couldn't help but hear the tremendous joy and happiness that you had experienced growing up on the barge. And throughout my life, my mother would go back and recall the stories of her time growing up on the barge. And it was always fun. They had so much fun, and the adventures, and I'll go into a couple of stories, will probably raise the hair on the back of your neck, but if the parents today ever thought their kids did these things, they'd probably keep them in prison or something. But there were, I couldn't help but hear the joy in your voices of those experiences, and the things that most people growing up in a city don't have, like opening the windows that are 10 feet and having that briny smell come through and invade your every sense. But my mother passed those stories on to us. And so I don't know where to go from here except to the stories. Okay,
Yeah,
so we're
please do.
talking 1930 this is. So they lived on the boat. My mother always referred to it as the boat. We lived on the boat. And I believe, I'm a little hazy on some of these time frames, but I think that they were living here prior to the Depression of 1929, the crash, I should say, because there was a depression that was going on in the United States at that time for a few years. So my grandfather was great foresight because he thought by living, because the barge that he was in charge of took care of hauling coal and dry ice. So that's what the stories, at least that I know of. I don't know all of the other details of it. So there was always, my mother thought that that was really a cool thing because they had a place to live that was open and airy. They had coal, that they could probably use for heating purposes, which a lot of people during the Depression times had difficulty getting, if they could get it at all. And certainly the dry ice keeping things cool in the warmer weather. So my mother always felt that it was, and always referred to that period of time, which may have been 5 years, maybe 7, not sure on time frame that they lived on the boat, but she always referred to it as the happiest time of her life, growing up. And some of the stories are her and my Uncle Ned, who was a year younger or 2 years younger than my mother, wound up thinking that they were going to go on a little ride on the water and found an old piling, pier or something, that was floating in the water. And then they decided, hey, I bet you we could go on that. Well, they wound up in the middle of the river, the middle of the Hudson, and they had to send out boats to tow them pretty much back in. And in the meantime, my mother was an adventure, but she was also vocal. She was screaming the whole way. And she told my Uncle Ned at that time, if we get out of this alive, I'm going to kill you. That kind of story. So that was one of the stories, the many, many stories. They would walk along the railroad yards in Jersey City. They would go down to the Polish neighborhoods for my grandmother and go to the Polish butcher shop, Morris. I think his name was Morris, I'm not sure. There were some sad stories too. There was one, but to show the community, I think of barge living or the life in the marina. I don't know, would you call it a marina? Or something like that. Right?
That'll work for our purposes. That's fine. Use your own language.
All right, well, there was a little boy, a little fella that he was about 7, who, the word was in all of the families that lived on the boats, many of them in that time, would tell the children, don't go near this area, don't go near the edge, you don't want to fall in and so on. The warnings. And unfortunately, this one little guy did fall in, but he fell between the boat, the barge, I guess, and the dock. And they said they sent out the alarm, however they did it, through word of mouth screens, however, to the entire boat community there. And every man that could came there and jumped in the water to position themselves between the barge, between the boat and the dock to get the boy leverage, but unfortunately it didn't happen and he did drown. So there were those horror stories, which of course, a lot of the kids remember that, for the rest of their lives, and we're very careful, of course, with all of that. I'm trying to think of, there are so many stories. One thing I do want to say, you were talking about the buckets. I think Sophie, you were saying this. Well, my mother, they lived on the boat. So my mother, they all went to St. Peter's Catholic School, downtown New York, which at the time, now, it was raised, and the footprint of our old World Trade towers were the footprint. St. Peter's was the footprint of the towers. So I found out this story when we went to StoryCorps after 9/11, and we brought my mother to tell her stories of the relation to the World Trade Center, and that's what she talked of that, which I'd never known that was the situation. But anyway, so attending St. Peter's, because they lived on the boat. The barge would come up many times, most of the time, and come up where there would be a ship. And in order to get from the barge to land, okay, the ship would send over this gigantic net to the barge. The kids would go into the net and they would be heaved over the ship onto land. Did I tell you my mother was screaming when she was on the boat? Wow, it was so bad. They didn't know what to do, but there was no alternative. But my aunt Martha, who was 4 years older than my mother, you know, varying times of when they were living on the boat, she was the responsible person, and she was given whatever, a nickel, a dime, whatever it was, to make the phone call, so that when they got out of school and they had to call a certain number, I guess for the Lehigh Valley, to find out where their barge was, because they couldn't just be picked up and dropped off onto Jersey City. They didn't, you know, that wasn't their house. Their house was on the boat, you know. So they had to do all of this kind of, you know, doing a scheduling kind of thing and finding out and communicating, you know, how are we going to get and there were like 4 or 5 of them, you know, in a row to get, you know, quite a responsibility, but that was the responsibility, and she did it, and they all did it. So really quite a feat when you think of in today and how we all have school buses pick us up in front of the house, take us to school, and then drop us off, and all of that. And these kids, sorry, on the cell phones, yeah, sure. So it was. The stories were wonderful, and I don't know the technical ends of, you know, what my grandfather actually did as a captain of the barge. You know, I just feel so honored to be here. Representing him, representing my mother as well. Because she spoke so lovingly of her time on the boat. Yeah.
We've got a couple more slides that our archivists dug up, so we'll share those here.
This is them. I don't know if you can see them. This is my grandmother and grandfather's wedding picture in Ireland. So they got married in, I think it was in 1911, and then or 1912 or something like that, and they came over in 1922. So young, beautiful people.
And we'll share those with the folks at home if you don't mind. There we go. And we'll pull up our slides after folks at home get to see that photo.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Oh, how many were each one put in the net? I don't know that. I'm afraid I can't answer that. My mother probably was the one that had the most dominating voice. I would imagine they were those, you know, those big nets that they pick up cargo and move it to a dock. It was those. Now, you know, I'm sure there would have to be a number. I mean, my mother remembers holding on to those big cables, part of the netting. But I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm afraid to go on a roller coaster. You know, going on one of those, like. Whoa.
So we got immigration documents here for Mary Karen.
Oh, okay.
And
that's my mom, Mary, known as May, and Martha, who I'm named after.
Let's see, and then there's a registration card. There's a draft card from 1942 for it.
1942 draft. Oh, well, he would not have that. He wasn't in the war.
No. This is another.
Oh, you know what? This is probably my Uncle Ned. My Uncle Ned was in the Navy, and he had the same name. Yes, my Uncle Ned is deceased.
So it's a draft card, but he passed away before.
Oh, but it says date of birth 1890.
Yeah.
It says deceased August 31st.
Oh, deceased. Yes, that's correct. That's correct. I'm sorry. I thought it was.
Were there any other questions from the house here, or in the audience at home?
Yes.
Do you remember, did your
Stories from
Well,
your
my,
aunts and uncles.
one story on my Aunt Martha, they were all, my grandmother was a very small, little tiny woman and very powerful, and her word was law in the house. So she really pressed my grandfather to leave this particular job because my Aunt Martha, she was 15 in 1930. So by the time she got to be 16 and 17, there were, she said that there was the daily catcalls that she was subjected to in and around the dock areas was just a bit much. So that's not such a good story, but you know, they all shared a lot of stories. My mother seemed to be the one that had the adventuresome because her age was about right. The other ones were a little bit younger. Her and Ned were like, you know, peas and carrots. You know, they were out there and doing all their little adventures and stuff because they were a pair, and the other ones were kind of young. And my Aunt Martha, of course, was much, you know, she was older, so more sophisticated.
Even with the larger cabin, that's still a lot of people. Do you know how many are sleeping to a room? How many sleep to a bed?
I don't know. I can't remember. I know that I for some reason, and I could be wrong on this, that it was 4 rooms. So I would suspect, you know, the boys were in one room, the girls were in another room, like the grandparents maybe in another room, and then the general area. I don't really know, but probably something like that.
Any other questions?
Ned, my uncle Ned, no, he was in, I thought this when I first looked up at that, I thought that was referring to him. I didn't see all of the dates, no. My uncle Ned lived, not when he was older, is that what you mean?
No, was he?
Oh, yes, yeah, no, they were all together. They were all together, and yeah, they were comrade in arms, both of them, my mother and my uncle Ned, yeah.
So they did ultimately move to shore then?
Yes, and that's one thing that my sister Susie shared with me this morning, that they hated it. They moved from the boat to 18th Street and hated it. They you know, Susie told me, you know, that they did not like it. They bring, you know, as to Dahlia and Sophie's stories, it's so different. And then you're really restricted in this, and you know, an apartment on 18th Street, different, just very, very different. And they weren't used to that, you know. And also, as your community that you talked of and mentioned a few of the people, there were always eyes watching where you were going and taking care of you. The anonymity of living on 18th Street was like, nobody really, you know, paid too much attention, you know. And that community, as I stated when I first started talking, a lot of the people were from Arklow, where they were from, and they knew each other from Ireland, and they were like kind of the extended families, and watched out for each other's children and took care of, you know, like that kind of thing. So they didn't like when they moved off the boat.
David has often said that living out here on the water in the barge has been almost like a rural existence, or maybe you were quoting your kids, I can't recall. But
Did you say rural?
rural.
Yeah, oh, sure. You were kind of removed from, you know, that other, and remember at that time, you know, things were very, very, very rough in the United States. You know, at that time, I remember my mother saying that my grandfather was doing haircuts, you know, for people to, you know, for a nickel or something like that, to make money, because it was very, you know, dire straits, you know, for a lot of people during the Depression years. So they felt, you know, kind of, they had a little extra having the boat, and it kind of saw them through very, very hard times. I think it's good. So, and thank you, David. Thank you for extending the invitation to me and allowing me to share my stories and bring my mother back. You know, we keep talking about people that you love. They're still here and they're still with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Martha, and thank all of you. We really hope that you'll keep us in touch, keep in touch with us as you remember more stories when you're talking to relatives and sharing memories. If you discover something new, we hope that you'll give us a call, leave us a message, send us a note with that memory. We want to make sure that we keep them and for future generations and share them with people as they visit us here. For those of you on the barge, we have some cool refreshments in the back for you to enjoy. For those of you at home, thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you again on July 24th. We'll be back here on the barge with some more waterfront workers, including longshoremen from the end of the break bulk era before containerization took over entirely. And again, thank you, Humanities New York, for making this event possible. Have a good day. Take care.